I'd like to go ahead and get started. Thank you for everyone for being seated. We're going to start with, we have only 3 bills today, guys, so this should go relatively quick. But knowing this committee, that's not necessarily true. So we'll start with House Bill 112. We have Tom Akris, Jeff Kelly. Seems like this is a battle of agencies today, huh?
I hope not. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the Economic Matters Committee. I am Jeff Kelly. I have the great pleasure of serving as the Executive Director for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission. It's a pleasure being here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to explain our position. And hopefully it's not a battle between the agencies at all. We love the Comptroller's Office.
Also, gentlemen, we do have a new microphone system, so you have to leave
Better?
a little bit. It doesn't cut you here, but I think it's more of the speakers that don't work. So we can't hear you, although it is being picked up. If you can please speak a little, make your voice.
You bet. Can do. Okay. So thank you. I'm here on behalf of the ATCC and in support of House Bill 112. House Bill 112 does a very simple thing. It removes the legislative mandate for an MOU between the Comptroller of Maryland and the ATCC. Many of you may recall the original mandate occurred a few years back when the ATC was created and elements of our operation, which then resided in the Comptroller's office, specifically alcohol and tobacco regulation, were removed from the Comptroller's office and created a new separate independent state agency called the Alcohol Tobacco Commission. And in doing that, all we got were a handful of agents and a handful of inspectors, but we didn't have any legislative support. We didn't have, enough agents and inspectors to do our basic work. We didn't have enough, and I'd say the Comptroller's office, I know that very well, especially then, didn't have enough to carry out those mandates either. So the General Assembly said, create this MOU, share your resources, get the work done. Do your inspections, do your enforcement work, and share those resources. And so we did. One thing that we didn't have any of at all was logistical support, human resources, IT, finance, budget, procurement. We had none of that. And so that MOU also provided for those services that were absolutely vital to us. And quite frankly, without them, we wouldn't have existed. We had no capability of doing that. Then I would say the Comptroller was incredibly generous in the manner in which Comptroller Frenchot and then Comptroller Learman continued. And I promise I will be brief. But again, as I mentioned, the immediate remedy was for the General Assembly to say, let's get this MOU, let's make sure that they're able to do the job still, and let's make sure that there's sufficient services to both entities. In the years since, and with the passage of a couple of pieces of legislation, especially the Cannabis Reform Act, the General Assembly gave us the pins and the funding necessary to build out our inspections and enforcement teams and to take care of our logistics. So now today, I'm happy to say within our own agency, we have a human resources function. We have a budget procurement finance team. We have IT supplied through Do It. And there are some other ancillary items that we were getting from the Comptroller that we no longer needed, like access to their licensing system. We have our own independent licensing system. And Tom's going to be able to go into some detail about some of that. But just want to let you know that all of that access, that help that we had then, we vitally needed, and today we equally don't need it any longer. We are in a much, much better position. Current law outside of the MOU dictates that we will share information with the Comptroller for the good, especially the good of our tax and alcohol work and tax-related issues as well. And we do that. We have a terrific relationship with the Comptroller's office still, and most specifically with our kindred spirits in their Field Operations Bureau. Under existing law, the ATCC itself, the body of the commissioners, the Office of the Executive Director, and our Field Enforcement Division all have authority from you to enter into MOUs with virtually anyone we need to carry out our mission. And we take that responsibility seriously, and we do it. Most recently, we've entered into an MOU with Baltimore City Sheriff's Department so we can start going into places that are selling illicit cannabis to underage consumers. We're using their cadets, and we're doing this in conjunction with them through an MOU. We recognize the importance and the value, and we enter into them when it exists. We don't think that the mandate exists today. It is problematic for us to have a mandate, and again, I think Tom will get into some details, but it's a problem for us. We are going through an OLA audit that started last spring. It's still going on piecemeal, and one of the issues that have come up a few times is a couple of periods of time that we had the mandate for an MOU, but we simply didn't have one in place. And that's not a comfortable position to be in out of compliance. So for all these reasons, I respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 112. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee, my name is Thomas Akris. I am the Director of the Legal and Legislative Division for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission. And on behalf of the ATCC, I too urge a favorable report on House Bill 112. Just have a few additional points to make. To Director Kelly's point, this body had the foresight to ensure that the ATCC and the Comptroller's Office were going to be working together in years moving forward. That's why there are 3 locations in the Alcoholic Beverages and Cannabis article that empower the Commission, the Executive Director, and the Field Enforcement Division to enter into cooperative agreements and MOUs. I wanted to really touch base on a point that Director Kelly made in regards to data. There really is no data sharing that is under this MOU. And here's an example. Recently, a few weeks back, our investigative team reached out to the Comptroller's investigative team to find out a name associated with the current ongoing investigation. There are things called state taxpayer information and federal taxpayer information, which precluded the Comptroller's Office from releasing that name. So even under this MOU, that kind of information can't be shared. The MOU that's in place now covers 3 things. 1, a parking lot in Jessup that the members of the ATCC can use if they happen to seize a vehicle that is contraband product. We do not need that access to the lot anymore. We have our own parking garage and our own headquarters located in Baltimore City and plenty of space to park those vehicles. 2, it covers something called breakage, which is essentially if you're a wholesaler and you have bottles of beer in your warehouse and those bottles of beer break for whatever reason, there's an excise tax that was paid on those bottles of beer. And what we would do is support the Comptroller's Office by going, visiting the location, counting the bottles so that the wholesaler could go back to the Comptroller and get their credit for the excise tax that they paid. And lastly, this covers something called bonds, which are surety bonds. If you are a manufacturer or wholesaler, you're going to get a surety bond along with your license because you have to remit your taxes quarterly. If you fail to remit your taxes quarterly, the Comptroller can then call in that surety bond for payment for those taxes that you owed. Those are the 3 things that are in this MOU. We don't need the access to the lot in Jessup. The bonds, if by law, if they come to us mistakenly, we send them back to the Comptroller. And then lastly, with breakage, again, this is a tax issue, which we are more than willing to help the Comptroller's Office on. And how many, if the question is, how many times do we get inquiries for breakage? 1 to 2 times a year. And that's across the state of Maryland. So those are the 3 things that really cover that are covered in the MOU. And to Director Kelly's point, we start these negotiations with the Comptroller's Office in April. We will send a copy of the MOU. And we don't get this MOU signed until October or August. This is well past the July 1st to June 30th date. And when the OLA auditors came in, that was a question and a concern because they didn't know who to hold accountable and responsible for the requirements of the MOU. So for these reasons, we would urge a favorable point, and we believe that the law empowers us if needed, and we have no problem if needed to work with the Comptroller on an MOU, which the law authorizes. And I welcome any questions.
Tom, or Jeff, the OLA, what does that stand for?
Sorry. Office of Legislative Audits. I apologize, Mr. Chair.
No worries. Just want to clarify. And you're saying one of the main reasons is obviously that it wasn't getting signed in a timely manner, but also that it's become superfluous?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, we'll now call up the unfavorables. Rachel Sessa and Howarth Van.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Rachel Sessa, and I have the pleasure of serving as Deputy Comptroller of Law and Oversight. And with me today is Director Van Howarth of our Field Enforcement Bureau. The Office of the Comptroller respectfully opposes HB 112. We really appreciate the partnership that we have with the ATCC currently, and hopefully we'll continue to have after this hearing. Friends can disagree, right? But look, we feel as though the legislature got it right in 2021 when it mandated that the two agencies must enter an MOU by making it a shall. While existing statute does require us to cooperate and share some information on how certain matters operate, it doesn't get into the specifics or the granularity of how we do these things or who specifically is responsible for sharing what. The MOU is important because it does depict these things. Among other things, it stipulates how these records must be maintained, how the bonds are processed and stored, and how certain claims are handled. It also identifies, as I previously mentioned, which agency is responsible for performing these functions. Shall is a great way to future-proof. And, when there's a change in leadership down the road, if the future comptroller and the future governor don't have such a great relationship like they do now, there'll still be a law on the books requiring these two agencies who are very much still interreliant on one another to enter into an agreement. And we had the privilege and the pleasure of meeting with the ATCC back in the fall about this bill, and we suggested instead of taking this approach, why don't we try making the MOU evergreen, so we don't have to renegotiate every year, only when something changes or absent exigent circumstances. So we still feel as though that's a viable and preferable pathway forward in lieu of this legislation, and for that, we respectfully urge an unfavorable committee report on HB 112.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. For the record, my name is Van Howarth, and I am the Director of the Comptroller's Field Enforcement Bureau, and I'm here also to oppose House Bill 112. I have served in leadership roles with both the ATCC and the Comptroller's Office and understand the intricacies of the duties performed by both agencies. I'm here today with Deputy Comptroller Sessa to assist with answering any questions that you may have relevant to our opposition to House Bill 112.
All right. Well, I guess I'll have a few questions because I guess what I don't understand, if you have an agency that says, look, and I remember, because we're the ones that created this agency, that we did so for the very reason that Jeff was talking about, because they really needed that assistance at the time, and it's in the infancy stage that they no longer seem to be in. And I also know, that agencies want to the best of their ability, much like your agency, remain as free as possible to make those choices. It seems like the ATCC just feels that they've grown up now and don't really need a mom or dad. They just want to be able to, decide the nature of the relationship between themselves and the controller. And I guess I don't understand, and I say this knowing that we, some time ago, made sure we split the comptroller from the alcohol, tobacco, or was it ATC back then? And then we did a very clean split because of, well, forever the reasons we don't need to put on the record anymore. But that was said and done to make sure that they're a separate standalone agency. And it seems like that we may have put some strings back on the agency to tie them to the comptroller out of necessity. I don't know if it was the goal of this body. It definitely wasn't my goal to make that permanent. It was a measure to get them started. And I'm just trying to figure out what I understand. What would it hurt by allowing them instead of having it be must? Because it doesn't forbid these UNOs from being entered into. It doesn't forbid the information to be shared. You can still do all those things. I don't really see, I'm just not sure when it comes to these two separate agencies, what's the harm in completely bifurcating them and allowing these agencies to operate operate how they choose.
Thank you, Chair. That's an excellent question. And I would say, a bit more to that future-proofing kind of point that I, made previously in that, they were still very much, they were actually in our offices, like shared office space up until mid-2023. And there's still so many mechanisms. And again, we were mid-negotiation of the 2024 MOU when they came to us and said, hey, we really think that we want to alter this alcohol breakage process. Can we discuss what that would look look like? And we're like, yes, and this is a great opportunity to memorialize that, how it works in our MOU. And that way, as folks change or there's attrition, there's a document to go back to make sure that both agencies know how certain functions should operate, who's responsible for getting this information to whom, who has access to it, who's storing the records, all of those things that, two agencies who are obligated to share information should be required to memorialize that. And again, just, to future-proof that and to make sure, if I was a bond applicant and I submitted, there's a lot of money on the line with that, right? And so I would also want to know and hope that the two agencies, that are responsible for handling these types of inquiries or these types of matters have something codified, have something, in writing that they can go back to and understand who's responsible for what. And with that, also to allow Director Howarth, if I've missed anything there.
No, the only thing that I would say is it becomes important to memorialize the processes for the bond, transfer of bonds, recording of bonds, and as well as the breakage processes. Once established, they should not change throughout the years. However, our concern is right now we have a great working relationship with the ATCC, but quite frankly, we don't know how that's going to look 5 or 10 years from now. So this MOU requires the agencies, regardless of their want, if it's a shall, they have to work together.
Okay, I guess I say, the MOU that you enter into it every year?
That is correct, Chair Wilson.
And while the subject matter seems to be fairly locked in as the things that you must discuss, the standards, and you can always make changes year to year on how you want to deal with breakage, things of that nature, right? You're not locked into the same thing every year, right?
Thank you, Chair Wilson, for that question. It is specified in the MOU, but there is a provision that allows us to, renegotiate or revisit it if things change down the road. Right. But there is still that agreement for that time period as to how things are handled.
Gotcha. It seems like the things that you want to do can still be done. It's like when one party doesn't want to be involved with the other anymore, it's like, it's awkward to force them to stay married. I don't know if, again, I was waiting to hear if there's something that is going to dramatically change. And that's the future proofing I get. And, but I just was wanting to hear if there was something that, it doesn't seem like there's anything that's going to dramatically change in your relationship just because you're not wedded by this mandate if this bill was to pass. It sounds like you'll have the same working relationship. You'll negotiate the same things with breakage and the like, regardless of whether the mandate, the shall is there. Am I correct?
Thank you for that question, Chair Wilson. I think it depends, right? Because if there's down the road, there's, a different, leadership in place and they say, you know what, thank you, but we don't want to be in an agreement. We don't want to, enter in an agreement with your agency anymore. And there's still these functions that we're obligated to collaborate with and how information is shared and records are kept, then there may not be those conversations or they become very difficult and tenuous and awkward, to be quite frank.
All right. I believe we have 2 questions. Delegate Arentz.
Just a quick question. Is there anything involving staff here? I mean, I would think that this would free up some of your staff if you didn't have to do this. Is that correct or wrong?
Delegate, thank you so much for that question. I would say in terms of staff resources, now that, with where we are, it's pretty nominal in terms of the negotiation of the memorandum of understanding, if that answers your question, Delegate.
Yes, but I guess I'm more on the line of it's a way for you to be more efficient in other areas. And it sounds like irregardless of this MOU, you guys do work together like every other agencies that have similar things. I guess I don't really see why it's so important to have this MOU. As the chair said, we did this for a reason back years ago, and it's separated. The cord needs to be cut somehow. And that was the intent of the legislation back then, to separate the 2 units. And I guess I'm not clear on what damage could be done. And if you don't get along later, if this happens, that's a big if, but I think that happens across all agencies. Wouldn't you agree?
Thank you, Delegate, for that question. I've had the honor of serving with multiple state agencies, and certainly there were, from that perspective and from my prior experience, certainly understand and identify areas where, agencies, are sharing information, but it still needs to be explicit in a memorandum of understanding and can have experienced when those two agencies have butted heads, and unfortunately weren't able to reach an agreement. And having that's something in statute that you can point to say, no, we have to sit down, we have to talk, we have to reach an agreement, I think is certainly uniquely helpful in this particular circumstance, and I could see where that could benefit other agencies as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, are there other agencies in which you have MOUs with?
Delegate, thank you so much for that question. Yes, absolutely.
Can you tell me which?
Sure. The Department of, I'd be happy to get you a full list, Delegate, and follow up with you. But certainly there's a particular section of statute in the tax general article regarding exemptions for the sharing of particular data, and it specifies the agencies for which we enter into agreements with to share that information.
Can you just rattle off a couple of the big ones?
Yeah, absolutely. The Department of Labor, the Maryland Health Exchange, I believe, as well, and the, like I said, I'd be more than happy to get a fuller list to you.
The list is fine, thank you.
Thank you, Delegate.
And lastly, since David mentioned the other agencies, and those other agencies are mandated by statute or by legislation?
Thank you, Chair, for that question. Because of the nature of the information that is shared with them, that we have to enter into agreements with them as well.
And so it's mandated. There's a shall. You understand my question, right?
I understand your question, Chair
Because
Wilson.
we've locked these guys in with a shall.
Yeah.
What other agencies are locked in with a shall? Because I don't believe there are any, but.
There are, and thank you, Chair, for that question. Pursuant to, federal law with the sharing of certain federal tax information, and then there's an exemption in state tax general that allows us to share that, and so through that process, we have to enter into agreements with them.
But you give them the state, there's nothing else at the state, no other agencies that we mandate to partner up with the Comptroller's Office at this point, besides the ATCC, to my understanding. If there are some, please get me a list. And lastly, are there any of these other states or agencies that you're mandated to have an MOU where they're doing it unwillingly, where they also don't want it, but we're still, forcing the issue? Are you having this issue where other people who are in current MOUs with you don't want to do it anymore, but by law or whatever, it still has to be done?
That's a great question, Chair Wilson. I'm not, off the top of my head, I can't think of any. However, what I will say is that the nature of this relationship between the Comptroller's Office and ATCC is unique, right? Because they used to be a part of the Office of the Comptroller. And again, there are still very much areas in which we're very much intertwined, unlike other agencies where there hasn't been the splinter off or this separation from the two.
But we did that as a body. We did that with, we were very definite in what we were doing and intentional. And so I think that's where we're kind of in the mix right now. We as a body here intentionally split them apart and splintered them to be a standalone and not be a part of the comptroller. So I just want you to keep that in mind, because I'm not sure what the outcome of the bill is, but we knew what the outcome was before the C was added to ATCC, and it was to bifurcate them completely. And I know we wedded them somewhat, but I don't think that was meant to be permanent by this body. So I do appreciate the testimony. I don't see any other questions, so I believe that concludes this hearing. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Whitney.
Excuse me, ma'am. Sorry. You are Rachel?
Yes.
What's your last name, ma'am?
Sessa.
Do you have a relative that works with us?
A relative, Chair Wilson? How would you define relative?
Somebody you might be married to?
Could be.
Okay. I'm sorry, because it all.
There's a shall in that, too.
There we go. That's. That was great. Thank you very much, ma'am. I just thought I recognized you. Thank you. moving on to House Bill 451, Delegate Lehman. If you have a panel, please bring them forward.
Yes, sir. Can I bring up my panel of Tom Clark and Kevin O'Keefe? And Mr. Chairman, I do have one virtual witness, Stephanie Sweet.
Looks like there's a second virtual witness in favor too. Ike Casey?
Oh,
That's fine, we'll call them in. Is Miss,
okay.
is Miss Sweet on your panel?
Yes.
Okay, then we'll call her in turn.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, and esteemed Economic Matters Committee members. For the record, I'm Delegate Mary Lehman, and I am back here for the third time this session, 2 days in a row. But today, I am here to present House Bill 451, requiring prompt payment by owners to prime contractors and prime contractors to subcontractors on state and private construction projects within 60 days of receipt of an invoice. What this bill does is ensure that everyone involved on state and private construction contracts gets paid on time, primes and subcontractors. Both union and non-union contractors and subcontractors and their representatives with whom I have spoken agree that folks should be paid promptly for satisfactory work. So there is a remedy in this bill that says that if an invoice is not paid on time, there is a 9% penalty per year on any unpaid balance, and that interest begins on the 60th day after receipt of the invoice. So the problem the bill addresses is that when subcontractors on construction projects are not paid in a timely way, because many of them operate within very narrow profit margins, it causes financial strain that could cause a business to miss payroll or employee benefit contributions, and in extreme cases, a small subcontractor that has not been paid for the work it performed satisfactorily may be forced to close. Prime contractors will say when they don't pay subcontractors, it is typically because they have not been paid by a state agency or private owner. But even when contractors have been paid, there are occasions when they do not pay subs in a timely manner. So I'm going to answer the question. I know I'll get asked what other states, especially nearby, have similar laws. So Virginia and North Carolina have prompt payment laws for public and private construction projects. Both laws state that non-payment to a contractor by an owner is not a valid reason not to pay a subcontractor. In North Carolina, the penalty for failure to pay is 1% per month. In Virginia, the penalty on private contracts, if not specified in the contract, is 1% per month. I do want to note that the Virginia law, they first passed a law on state construction contracts and projects only, then later came back and passed one on private contracts. That law had bipartisan support in the Virginia legislature and was supported by a Republican governor. It took effect in January of 2023. I also spoke with the leadership of the American Institute of Architects, and its prompt payment remedy for late payments on construction projects is 1% to 2% per month. I'm submitting 2 sponsor amendments. The first, I am proposing a change to that 60-day prompt payment requirement to 45 days, which other stakeholders have indicated is acceptable. Also, secondly, at the end of paragraph 4 on page 5, at the end of line 15, I'm adding the following sentence. Any provision in a construction contract contrary to this section shall be unenforceable. In closing, I cannot underscore the importance to the construction industry of a law to require prompt payment. It will keep people employed and help subcontractors remain financially viable when they have provided work whose quality is not in dispute. It's no secret that I was asked to put in this bill by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, but this bill, as you will hear from witnesses, is important to union and non-union subcontractors alike. Just like prime contractors, subs are minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned, owned by persons with disabilities. But regardless of ownership, they all deserve to be paid on time for satisfactory work. Thank you for your consideration. I urge a favorable report with amendments. Mr. Clark.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Tom Clark. I represent the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 26. I'm here in full support of HB 451, a bill that protects the small Maryland subcontractor from going out of business simply because a general contractor delays payment even after the product is signed off and deemed complete and professional. Whenever a GC puts a job out for bid, maybe 10 or 20 subcontractors put a bid, the GC might take the lowest bid. They might take a subcontractor with a history of doing quality work. But when they pick that bid, there's a contract signed, and nowhere on that contract does it say you may not get paid for quality work performed on schedule. If it did, no one would ever bid such a job. There are various reasons the GCs withhold payment. Maybe the owner or GC has a problem with the work the cement contractor does, but he won't pay the plumbing contractor. He or she won't pay the plumbing contractor. Yet for some reason, maybe a subcontractor has 3 separate jobs with 3 separate contracts with this same GC. If there's a discrepancy on one job, the GC might not pay on any of the jobs. That's a recipe for killing a small business in Maryland. Most general contractors are not small companies. 95% of them are large regional companies with a I will pay when I want attitude. Members of the committee, the general contractor makes the big money because they take the big risk. In today's system, all the risk is on the subcontractor. I asked the committee to protect the small, often minority-owned Maryland subcontractor by supporting HB 451 and making sure that subcontractors get paid on time for quality work delivered on schedule and as per contract signed by both parties. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson and members of the committee. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. I'm here on behalf of Independent Electrical Contractors Chesapeake, which is a trade association based in Laurel, Maryland, that represents 200 electrical contractors, almost all of whom are subcontractors. And we support this bill because, as mentioned by the sponsor, Mr. Clark, it's very essential for these small contractors, subcontractors, to get paid in a timely manner. Otherwise, they could face a lot of financial stress, including going out of business. And and one thing though, we do work closely with the general contractor. So I think it's important to realize sometimes it's the owner of the project that is delaying the payment that hurts both the general and the subs. But irregardless, we need to get paid despite the reason. And one last thing, if you look at the fiscal note, it said small business effect minimal. But it's minimal, might be minimal, but for these subcontractors who aren't getting paid, it can be very significant. For that reason, I hope you give this bill a favorable report.
Okay, before we ask any questions, we go to virtual. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, my name is Ike Casey. I'm the Executive Director of the American Subcontractors Association of Metro Washington. I humbly request, Mr. Chairman, that you allow my president, who is a contractor, to speak for ASA. She's in the waiting room, but she would have to be brought in. Is that possible, sir?
Is this Miss Stephanie Sweet?
No, this is Miss Kimberly Driggs.
So we can only go with the people that signed up on the list. So I'm sorry? You're Mr. Casey, correct?
Yes, sir.
And who are you asking to have speak?
Kimberly Driggs.
The only other person we have on the list is Mrs. Stephanie Sweet, sir, so you'll have to cover for her because she was not signed up to speak as a witness on this, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for
No
your
worries.
time. As Ms. Driggs has presented some testimony that I think is very salient to the points of this bill, as the association, we ask for you to report the bill favorably. We feel like HB 451 will do quite a few things to help subcontractors. Mrs. Driggs is the owner of D2 Site Work in Rockville, Maryland, and she has suffered tremendously for lack of payment. In her testimony that's presented to you, I hope you'll read it. It's a bit long, but I hope you'll read it. But she talks about a job for a university in which she had to wait over 90 days for $700,000. Now, she's not a big business. She's a WBE, an MBE, and has to suffer with that kind of payment situation. She did eventually get paid, but just imagine what it's like to wait 90 days for payment. It's just an unfair situation in construction that needs to be rectified. Our subcontractors throughout Maryland rely on a steady cash flow to remain viable. With the passage of this bill, these important business entities will know that money is coming in a reasonable time. And that's for work they've completed and properly invoiced for. We're not asking for payment for work that's not completed. Small minority or disadvantaged businesses that do not have the legacy funding of more established businesses are the most vulnerable to going out of business. I really thank Delegate Lehman for bringing this forward. The two amendments make it a much better bill, and we do ask that you report it favorably out of committee. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir.
Did you hear that?
Yes. Good job.
Go ahead, ma'am. Ms. Sweet, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Stephanie Sweet, and I am the owner of Bethel Electrical Construction Company of Maryland, and we're located here in Glen Burnie, Maryland. As a small woman and service-disabled veteran-owned subcontractor, prompt payment of services rendered is essential to the overall health of my business, and particular my employees. Any delay in payment for work that the general contractor, GC, has signed off on as professionally installed and complete puts my business at risk, significantly at risk. What's important is that Bethel Electric competes against many other subs to secure jobs. We offer competitive bids and have a 20-year history of doing electrical work on time, efficiently, and in a workmanlike manner throughout the state of Maryland. When I am awarded a job, the GC and I sign a contract to stipulate when I am to be paid, which is normally net 30, which is really reasonable. Most reasonable contractors would agree those terms are fair and practical. The problem arises when I complete the work and the general contractor withholds partial or full payment, especially without advance notice. These reasons vary from any sub may have not completed their contract, the GC may have a problem with another job, with another contractor, or sometimes it's just because they feel like it, no explanation given. I have employees and vendors to pay, and if I miss payroll, I will have to close my doors. Vendors establish credit based upon your ability to pay within 30 days, just like consumer or personal loans. These examples are not exaggerated. It's really the fact. Contractors to have, what I need is general contractors to have the same ethical business standards as Bethel Electrical. House Bill 451 makes that happen. I ask that the committee to protect my Maryland business and join me in support of House Bill 451. This is a piece of legislation that aid in the growth and longevity of many small and family businesses that are aligned with strong and economically sound states, which we live in, the state of Maryland. I thank you for hearing me out, and I ask that if you have any questions, please reach out.
Thank you, ma'am. Please stay on the line because there may be some questions for you as well. I would ask, let me just, I guess, start. So I think everybody here understands the whole importance of the prompt payment and the importance of making sure all these businesses are up and running. But I wanted to make sure I understood something. I believe a year or two ago, we passed a bill that said that if you did not receive your payment, you don't have to be in contract. Like, forgive me, but it was maybe 2 years ago where you're allowed to sue somebody you're not in contract with. So a worker could sue the GC. A sub could sue a prime, even if they're not in contract with that prime for prompt payment. Do you guys remember this bill? Because y'all were testifying for it, and we passed it. They gave legal remedies for individuals. Instead of just being able to sue the person that contracted you to do that job, you're able to go around them if they weren't paying you to sue the individual above them. You guys remember what I'm talking about?
Mr. Chair, if I could answer you, I am new to this issue. I do not recall that bill. I will tell you when we asked the Legislative Library for bills, laws in surrounding states, and at the federal level, there is a prompt payment law at the federal level, and there are the Virginia and North Carolina laws. But I was also made aware of a prompt payment law that was passed just last year, but that has to do with state contracts with just suppliers. And that turnaround, by the way, just for your sort of interest and edification, is 10 days prompt payment is required, but that is only for suppliers, so I'm not sure about the law.
That's fine, I'll dig
to which
into
you're
that.
referring.
I'll dig into that myself. So I guess my question would be, would you be opposed to amending this bill to say this, with the prompt payment requirements, once the general or the prime has been paid? Because the issue that I've seen throughout this state, especially dealing with counties, is they'll wait up to a year, and that everybody has to get a line of credit. And we could go, so would you be adverse to at least being where the person you're in contract with, or in this case, the prime, has to be paid first?
I will answer first and let my witnesses answer as well. I do not support what they call a paid when paid provision. I think that would be very difficult to enforce. It would require, sort of chasing around and doing detective work to prove a contractor, a prime contractor had been paid, and I just don't see it as enforceable. And again, the Virginia and North Carolina's laws do not have that requirement.
And so I guess you're saying that even if somebody didn't get paid for a year from a county, that they should be responsible. Now they contracted with somebody who's in violation, and they haven't received the money, because that's the part I'm missing. And they're not all gigantic. All the primes aren't huge, big multinational corporations or multi-state corporations. There are a lot of small ones. I'm one. I'm sure there's some sitting at this table. And sometimes they operate as subs, sometimes they operate as a prime.
So just quickly, respectfully,
No, I'm
Mr.
sorry, please, at least
Okay.
let me finish my statement.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. The problem is, so they're not all big, so it becomes very difficult if you're not getting paid to pay your workers. And I say that because that's exactly why you're here. You're here saying these subcontractors can't pay their workers because they're not getting paid promptly. And the argument would be, well, wouldn't that be the same for the general who's not getting paid promptly? The difference is he's going to get sued, and he's going to owe, by no fault of his or her own, what was it, 9%? Was that the one? I'm sorry?
It's
9% that's going to be, and by no fault of his own. And the argument of, well, that's the risk that he takes, which is what I heard, is the same risk that the sub takes. You take a risk when you're a sub. I take a risk when I'm a sub. That's why I have a line of credit. So I don't understand how that logic only applies to subs but not generals. Please.
If I may, remember HB 451 offers that same 9% penalty from the GC to the owner for their protection. Yes, there is a risk, but I want to let you know that a general contractor, there's brains, they're laying out the job, but they're not putting millions of dollars in for switchgear like an electrical contractor, or they're not buying any equipment. The money put out by the subcontractors is a lot more than what the GC would lose.
I don't understand how that logic applies nonetheless, sir, because he still has contracts he has to pay. The general contractor, when I get locked in as a GC or a prime, I have subs that I have to pay, but I can't do that till I get paid. So regardless of the amount of money I'm laying out personally, I'm laying out personal obligations, usually through lines of credit when I have to. So I don't understand how that's any different because they're not coming directly out of pocket. They're the GC. So I just don't understand how you're not negatively impacting some of these small and minority businesses that are actually primes in an unfair way, because it's not like they're doing it on purpose. That's why I ask why this amendment would not, to me, be fair. And it's really dealing with the same issue you have, that these businesses are getting punished by the individual that contracted them by not paying them on time. I just want to make sure that we don't hurt, because nobody wants people to go under the bus and not be able to get paid. But if they don't have the money, how does this work? And now you're stacking interest when they themselves haven't gotten paid. And that's what I don't understand. The standard that you're applying to the prime or the sub, I would think would be applied to the prime, in all fairness.
So, Mr. Chair, if I might quickly, again, primes are generally operating on larger profit margins, first of all. But secondly, I want to make a point about the 9% penalty. And this is a challenge with that provision. I frankly think that monthly penalties make more sense for this reason, because if that subcontractor ends up going out of business, that 9%, if it were 12 or 15, is not even going to end up doing them any good. And in the way it is structured, it would be paid at the end. So that's problematic as well. But I don't know if Mr. O'Keefe or any of the other witnesses, are they allowed to answer?
Answer my question, how it's fair. You said that primes make, they have larger profit margins. Again, that's patently offensive to me and my family, because I know what we're operating on right now, and it's not pretty. So I just want to know how it's fair, and unless we're just assuming that all business owners, which you guys get caught up in as subs, are making 20 and 30% profit margins, because that's the general assumptions. But we're not saying the subs make a lot. We're just saying the GCs make a lot. Unless we're going under that assumption, it is entirely unfair to say, well, you know what? They've got the money, because it sounds like that's what this bill's doing. Go ahead.
Well, I think as I mentioned earlier, we understand the challenges that the general contractors face, and the subs just want to get paid. So, I mean, I understand exactly where you're coming from, Mr. Chairman, and I think a lot of it, we just got to figure out, we want to get paid, and whether it's from the owner of the project, I mean, that's I guess the person that's ultimately responsible for paying everybody. And if, as a sub, if you make the general contractor responsible, then we get paid, so we understand why that's positive. But as I said, we work closely with general contractors too, so we don't want to be in a position to hurt them.
But and this is for anybody, but would, brief second, sir, one more point. But if we said only when paid, wouldn't that still help the problem? While keeping it fair, wouldn't that help the problem you're talking about? For those, somebody was talking about they're holding it because they have three, I think Ike was talking about, they have 4 separate contracts and they're mad about the work on one. Or they're kind of playing games because they don't like your performance, even though you've completed it and they've signed off. Wouldn't that still help those contractors who, they've got the money, they're just playing games? Go ahead, sir. I'm gonna get to you in a minute. Ike, give me 1 second, bud.
Yes. I think part of the problem is, I'm sorry?
You said no, it wouldn't. Even if we had that amendment, it would not be helping those people.
No, because some people do play games with the money. And like I said, they might even like a contractor, subcontractor, and want them on another job and say, wow, we're really good, take this job. Well, I have a higher profit margins for somewhere in Arbutus for another job, another contractor, and they'll hold the money just to make them sign the other contract, kind of force his hand.
But we're saying if we amend it to say when you get paid, you've got to pay, wouldn't that bad actor be punished? Because he is holding it to try and force your hand on another project, but he's gotten paid, so now he falls under this law, right?
Well, sometimes I believe that even when they get paid, they hold on to that money.
I know, and then those folks would get paid by my amendment. You're saying you don't even want that to be amended. I'm saying we can punish the bad actors, the intentional bad actors, without sweeping in the individuals who just don't have it or don't have the line of credit to even cover paying you because they've been messed over by their by the owner or by the person, the GC. In those cases, and especially if they have to take them to court. So now it's a longer time period just to get their money so they can pay out their people. I was just looking for something that was more fair. And it doesn't sound like you guys agree. Go ahead, sir.
I think I would agree, because the problem is really not the general contractor. The general contractors generally, I mean, there are those bad actors that do it wrong, but most general contractors, and according to state law, have to pay within 7 days. And 90% of them, 99% of them, I would say, do. So I think we already have that law, Mr. Wilson, but the thing is, you have certain priorities, and the general contractor has to get the job built as quickly as possible to make the owner happy. And so they have to get the material, they have to get the materials installed, and eventually somewhere on that list is pay the subcontractors. All we're saying is let's raise that a little bit. This bill will raise that argument that we haven't been paid, we can't pay you. Okay, well, let's find a way to get paid. Get you paid so we can get paid. That's what we're saying. We need to both levels get paid promptly.
And I'm gonna look into it because I appreciate that logic, because yes, but I would like them to get paid first. My concern definitely comes with going after people with empty pockets, because the people that they went into contract with are playing with their money. So I know we have a few questions, so I'll go to Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just help me understand. I'm trying to figure out how this bill would actually work in practice. So how does it affect retainer?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, so you got a one-year contract, $1 million. Usually it has a 5% retainer, and that retainer is released once the project's finished. You're saying you have to pay within a certain number of days, but if it's a one-year contract, so technically under this bill, the way it's written, that retainer couldn't be held.
Well, usually subs get paid like 25% of the work and then 50% and then 100%.
But there's a retainer that's released. The contracts I'm familiar with, there's a retainer released at the completion of the construction project. Under the way this bill's written, you wouldn't be, the owner wouldn't be able to hold that retainer. He'd have to release it. Or am I missing something?
That I don't know, sir.
This would only take.
I can follow up with you, Delegate Weibel.
But doesn't, think this bill implies that there has to be satisfactory work completion?
It implies that, but it doesn't state it.
I mean, I think that's the point. If
I
the
mean,
work's,
I just think in practice, I don't think the bill allows for that, because an owner's entitled to hold that retainer until the contractor finishes the job. And that's the only way the owner has that hammer to force the contractor to finish the job, is to hold that retainer until the job's complete. In my mind, maybe I'm missing something. Then you talk about notice. Is notice, so you said it has to be paid within a certain number of days. So
60 days.
the contractor says, hey, you owe me this money. And the owner says, no, we don't, because you haven't finished whatever. And that's an email correspondence? Is that acceptable
Delegate
notice?
Weibel, this only applies to work that has been completed satisfactorily. There's a whole dispute process that is laid out for both state contracts and private contracts.
But it says it must be paid within 60 days when billed. I, as a contractor, can bill the owner. Then it says the owner has to give a satisfactory reason if they don't make that full payment. What is the medium for the owner?
They have to do that before the 60 days.
Is it by email? Is it registered letter?
If the quality of the work is in dispute, it is spelled out in the bill what the.
But what is that notice? What's the form of that notice?
What's the point of the 60 days?
No, what is the form of notice? You say that the owner has to give notice to the contractor. Is it email correspondence? Is it registered mail?
It just says has to notify in writing the contractor's intention. This is on page 5.
And is email
to withhold
acceptable
all
now?
or part of the payment and the reason for the withholding. It doesn't. It just says in writing.
Okay, so email's fine.
I think in the modern world, yes.
Okay.
In the modern world.
All right,
yes.
and then your 9%, where did that come from?
That's, this bill, this is the third consecutive year this bill has been introduced, and that was an amount that was negotiated in prior years, the 9%. As I pointed out, it is less than other organizations that are a 1% per month, including AIA and including in North Carolina and Virginia. So the 9% is less than 12%.
So if a general
other
contractor and a
entities.
subcontractor have, I mean, to me, that seems like it's something that could be handled for in a private contract between two parties. So if they already have something in their contract, this 9% would override that? Or it just defaults to 9%? I mean, a lot of them say 1% per month, or
Right.
so you're overriding whatever would be in a private contract between two parties with this 9%?
I'm not clear on what your question is about, because you mentioned AIA again, and then you're asking, where's the 9%?
Yeah, so the
That is
two
in
questions,
this
where's the
law.
9% come from? And then why wouldn't you allow that penalty to be agreed upon between the two parties to the contract? you're inserting government intervention into a private contract.
This is the same law that, or similar to the laws in Virginia and North Carolina. That there is a penalty, and the law is where we're prescribing the penalty. There could be separate provisions in those contracts you're talking about between the prime and the subs.
So then who
This is what-
determines what the appropriate amount is that the 9% applied to?
We're prescribing that in the law. If you have some other amount, or any member of this committee that thinks there's a better amount, you'd like the AIA standard.
No, I mean, there could be
an
disagreement about the
amendment.
amount owed, but you're inserting a 9% penalty. So the GC might say, I owe you $100. The sub may say, no, you owe me 150. Who determines the principal amount to which the 9% is applied? Is that a court, or who resolves that issue between the two parties?
It begins on the 60th day under this bill, and it is the 9% on whatever the unpaid balance is of the invoice, and it goes forward until the invoice is paid. That is what we're prescribing.
Right. What if there's disagreement about the balance that's owed? That's what I'm asking.
Then that would be illegal, right? The legal system,
So the
whether it's
court system
arbitration or court or whatever.
All right, and then does this also apply to a sub who hasn't paid his supplier? So a plumber gets his stuff from, the local Lowe's or whatever and never paid his Lowe's bill. Does this also extend to that subcontractor who hasn't paid his supplier, or where does it end?
Are you referring to second-tier subcontractors and the supplies they buy, or
I'm
the
talking
work
about
they
the
do?
supplier for the sub, yeah.
As I said, this doesn't address suppliers, but we did amend state law last year. It was passed, it is law now, to include suppliers and prompt payment for suppliers to state government.
Okay.
But this bill does not do that.
All right, I'm still a little confused about the retainer question, but
Thank you.
I don't think you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Sweet, you're a business owner, correct?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay, I just kind of want to ask you, I think that we are in similar situations. Sometimes, maybe you're not necessarily a general, sometimes I'm a general, sometimes I'm a sub. I would agree with the chair. In many instances, I make more money as a sub than I do as a general. Might not always be the case for these massive construction projects, but I would think by and large, I probably make out better in most cases as a sub. But I want to come back to kind of the contracts and the terms that you have set up. So for most, if you're like me, industry standard is net 30?
Correct.
Okay, and so right now, what would happen if you weren't paid on time?
It's always an issue of several things. Number one, it's our vendors, making sure we pay vendors, because the minute that we don't pay them within a 30-day timely manner, they access charges to us. And so when you're a small contractor and you're continually being charged service charges over and over again, it adds up. Now, I'm on a large project right now out in Frederick. So I'm ordering high-ticket items, switch gears, things like that. So when I don't pay within $30, they can charge me as much as $300 or $400 every time I don't pay that, and it's reoccurring. And that is additional equipment that I can buy, so that can help a small business such as myself. So it's those type of things.
But I guess kind of going back, and I would like to talk to you offline, but kind of going back to what the chair was saying, can't you levy the same penalties on the GC? Because that's what I would do if they hadn't paid me in 30 days and the vendor or the OEM that I'm procuring equipment from invoices me for services or products or equipment that was properly delivered, and I don't receive that payment in 30 days, they owe me interest on that money. So, and I guess is the real fear here retaliation, that if you went to a GC and said, hey, you didn't pay me on time, and maybe you threaten a lawsuit, that you're not going to be able to have work with that GC going forward?
Sometimes it is for some small contractors. And I think what Delicate said before, it involves sometimes doing some investigative work. There was a project I was working on in Anne Arundel County, and I had not been paid for 90 days. And I had to go back to the county to find out that they were paid 90 days before, and they had not even paid me. And so when I said to them, help me to help you get paid, because I will call the county for you, then miraculously a check appeared. But I had to do the extra work because that's how passionate I am about the business, that I know that something's not right, that I know I should have been paid within 90 days. So just like the delegate said before, you have to go out and you have to do some investigative work. Did they get paid? Because I don't want to automatically come after GCs and say, hey, you should have paid me 30 days. I'm going to do my due diligence. So when I come to you and I know that you've gotten paid, then we need to have a conversation as to why I have not gotten paid.
Okay, all right, that is helpful. Like I said, I'm going to follow up. I will call you offline because I am a little bit more curious about your situation. To the sponsor of the bill, who enforces this? Who would enforce the penalty? Would it be the courts, so you still have to sue? And if we're scared of filing suit against the GC,
So I will just say, Delegate Crosby, thank you for the question. The bill does not address legal situations and private actions, but if you look at the testimony from the various unions, they are requesting an amendment. All three, I think, of the unions that submitted written testimony, they have consistent requests for two proposed amendments, and one is for subcontractors to have the ability to bring a private right of action, attorney's fees, costs, and treble damages.
but can't they already do that?
That's not in the law, though, now.
Can't they already do that through their contract? Like I have a contract up here. I mean, I feel like I negotiate with other companies all the time, and terms are in here. And then if you bring suit, I mean, legal fees are laid out in here, and then every purchase order cut for every project, right? I don't really understand the whole retainer argument, but typically, like you said, Mr. Clark, right, you're hit on milestones, right? It's like 25% of the work is complete, it's approved, your GC signs off on it, I invoice as soon as they approve it. And then 30 days later, there's a payment expectation. And on day 31, they know my legal team's coming for them. And so, like, maybe that is like a harsher, crueler industry than I'm in, but like, it kind of goes, you know, you're getting 25, 50, 75, 100% all the way to through the project. You know, you should be getting your payments 30 days after that by contract. And I think that you would have a private right of action with all the companies that you've already kind of negotiated with. And maybe I'm missing something, but I guess I just don't understand, like, how is this additional penalty going to motivate somebody to pay when, you know, I'm the GC. If I don't pay within my 30 days of my sub doing work, I'm getting hit with a 9% fee. I'm very well aware of that. Sometimes that could be millions of dollars.
And Delegate Crosby, it's the old stick approach, and it may or may not be effective with some folks, but it's going to be effective with others, is my short answer on the 9%. And I'm not an attorney, but yes, I'm sure a subcontractor could bring a private action. But I would guess that some of your smaller subs do not have, you know, attorneys, you know, quickly, easily at hand. It's not built into their budget. I can't speak to that directly because I'm not a subcontractor, but that would be more challenging. To have to hire counsel to get paid.
Yeah, kind of the dialogue up here is that, you know, they would have to do that anyway just to enforce this bill. And so, Tom, I do want to talk to you, not now, but about, you know, you getting, them essentially having leverage to force you to sign a different contract. That doesn't seem fair or right to me. We can have a different conversation on that topic, but I think, you know, we've kind of talked through the bill, and I'm not necessarily sold or convinced that this will make much of a difference. It may, but thank you.
Thank you.
And Tom, I do have a question. When we're talking about the enforcement mechanism, you seem hesitant, like that, no, there are other ways that they don't need attorneys to enforce. You do agree that the way this is drafted, they would still need to hire an attorney?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't, because when people talk about not being.
I worry about the mom and pop shop.
But that's what we're talking about, not being able to afford attorneys, and I was like, that they would have to get an attorney to enforce this, just like they would have to get an attorney to force the terms of their contract.
Correct.
I just want to make sure, so, because I agree with the mom and pop shops, and I'm an attorney, I get it. But we're creating something else that they would also need an attorney for, in addition to the terms of their contract, and I'm assuming, I don't do construction law, but as Brian was saying, the 25, 50, and 75, the pay and the timeless, that's all written in there as well as jurisdiction and all that. So my question to you is, how does this work in contract law? Because you've already signed a contract. You've already signed a contract, and the sub and the generals agreed to the penalties for failure to pay, things of that nature. So does this go on top of whatever's in those contracts as far as penalties? Because it seems to.
I would think it would be. I think it would be 9% to make it. And I think, like I said.
That's in addition to whatever the violation in the contract is.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, Mr. Chair, could Mr. Casey, Ike, respond? He's had his hand up.
Well, let me, Delegate Pippy, let me go ahead and ask him to go ahead.
My question, I think, was starting to get answered, so maybe for you, Delegate. So is there anything that would preclude you from adding all of these requests into a contract, like any of you, sir, or any of the folks listening? I mean, could you add this payment structure into and negotiate this contract before you sign it? I mean, if getting paid within 60 days is really important, could you broach that issue at the time of the signing of the contract before agreeing to contract with this prime?
You could, but if they don't pay you, you're done. Small shops are done in most cases.
So is this an issue where people are not following what the contract says, or is this, I mean, is that what we're talking about here? Where there's a contract in place and people are not following it, or?
Yes, they're not following it for whatever reason. Like I said, there's a couple reasons for not paying it. And one might be one subcontractor's not doing quality work, and then the electrical contractor or whoever does not get paid.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you got freedom to contract. I mean, if you're doing, I mean, I hate to say it, but you're bidding on a job. If the terms are not agreeable to you, don't do business with them. If they don't pay you in a timely manner, then you don't do business with again, and then you can always file suit. I mean, I'm just not really sure what we're doing here, because, you know what I mean? I'm just not, because the end result's the same, right? Because if your argument is, hey, you either breached the contract, or hey, you didn't follow state law, I mean, the next action is litigation of some sort, which, there's some debate about whether you guys want to do that or not. I'm not really sure what we're doing.
Well, Delegate, like you said, if you wouldn't sign a contract, it goes the same to the GC. If the owner of Good Humor wants to build an ice cream plant, and if you don't trust him, you wouldn't enter that contract. But you have entered the contract, and you have hired subs. So, I mean, it goes the same way, I would think. With subs, watch out what you sign for, and with generals, watch out what you sign for.
But it doesn't seem that that's what you're doing here. You're creating a different standard, because you just said it. For the subs, watch out what you sign for. The GCs, watch out what you sign for. But you're saying, but the subs, we're going to give them a different path. For the GCs, own it. And I'll also say this. We talk about mom and pop shops because there's some up here. The one thing you are as a contractor, I hope, is having the ability to contract, because that's the nature of your job. And so I don't want to make, there's a mistake, like we've got people here that are so blind and ignorant. Now, granted, they're going to be strong-armed by the GC. There is no change in the terms of the contract. I get that. They don't get to come in and say, well, we want this 9%. I get it, because there's somebody else waiting if they don't want it. But to assume that somehow these guys are just fresh out of the high school and they don't know anything about contracts, as you said, the standard you hold the GC to, hey, watch what you sign for, I would imagine you would also hold the sub to. And I feel this bill is creating a different standard. When all I was asking, all those things you said about bad faith and holding on and playing games, let's get them. Let's get them. But when they don't get paid, what are we doing? That's where I guess the breakdown is. And I know I'll let Ike go because his hand's been up for a while. Normally we don't keep running back and forth like this, but I know he's been patient. Go ahead, Ike.
The reason ASA supports this bill so fervently is because of the amendment that the delegate has put in that would make pay if paid null and void. Pay if paid would not be a clause in the contract. So that's what we got in Virginia, that's what's in North Carolina, because that's usually the excuse the general contractor gives when they haven't paid. And I go back to my point that it's a question of priority. If we can get the general contractors to put a higher priority on getting the money from the owner, then the subcontractors will be much better off. We've got to protect the small subcontractors, finishing contractors. There are tons of them out there that are going out of business because they don't get paid on change orders is the biggest problem. Change orders is the biggest problem. And, you know, they don't get paid for a year sometimes. They give birthday parties for their change orders. This will help that.
There's been a lot of conversation, and I just want to get refocused a little bit. This is similar or not similar to what has already been done with government contracts? Because I see the government contracts are excluded. So is this something we're doing with government contracts?
So Delegate Hill, thank you for the question. I think before you came in, I mentioned in response to a question by the chair that last year your committee actually approved an amendment to an existing state law on prompt payment of suppliers. And so that is a different law that only applies to suppliers of materials or services, but, excuse me, is not relevant to construction contracts.
Right. All right. So I heard that. So but if I hear you correctly, and the chair's also said that there can be a problem where contractors, primes, whatever, get paid, and for whatever reason, they don't immediately pass it off. They pay other priorities, maybe they've got other bills, they've got other things, and they have a cash flow issue. And maybe they don't have the great line of credit that the chair does. So they may take it out and say that, well, the sub, I'm not really obligated to do anything, so I'll get to them. I'm supposed to get them as soon as I'm paid. And you're trying to strengthen so that the subs become a priority for the contractor. So when they get paid, they don't get to say, I'll get to the sub later, I'll have to pay these other bills first. Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, that's a good question. I do want to point out in two different places in this bill, there are provisions that do say that if the prime contractor, general contractor has been paid, then they must pay within 7 days. If there is proof that they've been paid, if they admit to having been paid, then they have to pay even sooner. I don't know if that answers
And so the chair has offered an alternative remedy that he has stated he thinks is more fair, where the subs are treated similar to the primes, that everyone's getting paid because primes concerned that the owners aren't paying them and so forth. And I just wanted to be clear, the objection to the chair's remedy, I understand you don't think it's as good as this, but it sounded like there was an objection to the chair's remedy. You didn't think that was going to get to the problem you're trying to solve. And I just want to be clear on why that is.
My objection, I'd like my witnesses to weigh in if they could, Mr. Chair, was to the chair's direct question of the term that is used, paid if paid, and to Ms. Sweet's point, and I made it first and she agreed, it's difficult. I think it would put an added burden on subcontractors to do detective work to prove a prime contractor has in fact been paid. Right. If the prime contractor does not volunteer that information, yeah, I have been paid, by the owner or the state agency, how would someone know that? They would have to, figure out ways to pursue proving that the prime had in fact been paid.
Right.
That's my concern about that proposed provision.
And the idea that
and again, neither
regardless,
North
you'd have to get a
Carolina nor Virginia
lawyer,
have that.
that's not always true. Sometimes just being able to say, well, you're legally obligated to pay me, and reminding people that this is what the law says, they will go ahead and do it. Right? So you don't necessarily have to get a lawyer. I mean, there was an argument that you're going to get a lawyer anyway. Whether you can afford one or not, you're going to have to get a lawyer. But I think part of the idea of having laws in place is because people of good intention, once it's pointed out that you're legally obligated to pay me with interest, or you're legally obligated to pay me on time, or you're legally obligated to do something, will therefore follow the law without having to get attorneys involved.
Current law is 7 days. Current law is 7 days on private work, 10 days on public work. It's already the law.
All right, thank you.
And if you don't get paid within 7 days, what's the penalty?
That is not spelled out separately in this bill, Mr. Chairman.
So my solution was still the same, that right now there's a law that says you should pay within 7 days. I don't know what the penalty is, but it would be, I think, more of a stick, as you mentioned earlier, if they know that if we prove you got paid, now it's not just you're supposed to pay within 7 days, you got to pay 9%. And yet, I think it stacks every 30 days, because that is the stick, that while the law says you have to get paid, if we prove that you got paid and within the 45 days and you haven't paid, not only are you going to have to, you've broke the law of not paying within 7 days, which I don't know what the enforcement mechanism is or the penalty, but now you're definitely going to pay an additional 9% on top of the contract violations. I would think that would be a decent stick to say, yes, not only did you not pay the 7, but you haven't paid the 45. And so you're not just going to get yelled at, you're also going to be sued. And because we can prove that you didn't pay us when you got paid, at that point, you're going to pay that extra 9% that you wouldn't pay otherwise.
Again, Mr. Chair, I would just say if a sub has the means to hire an attorney, or maybe they're going to borrow more money just to stay afloat, or maybe they're just not going to hire an attorney, wait it out as long as they can, and maybe lay people off or go out of business. That is the concern. That is what we're trying to address in this bill. And if I might very quickly, can I provide information to Delegate Weigel on his question about retainage?
Sure.
Okay, I found the language in the bill. If this answers your question, Delegate Weigel, on page 4, lines 20 to 22, say nothing in this subsection may be construed to apply to or prohibit the inclusion of any retainage provision in a construction contract. I don't know if that's what you were trying to get at.
So your requirement to pay within 60 days. Sorry, so the requirement to pay within 60 days doesn't apply to
Does
retainer?
not affect, right. It doesn't change the conditions of retainage that were already spelled out in the contract in question.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to be clear, because we keep talking about people not being able to afford to get an attorney to enforce the original contract. They would need to get an attorney to enforce this. This is not being enforced by the AG. From what I've read, they're still going to need to hire an attorney to enforce either the contract that they were breached or this. This does not create a simpler remedy. I guess you could call it a threat, which is what I was saying. I was trying to come to, meeting of the minds here, but to say that the mom and pop stores, well, they can't afford to enforce their contract, then they won't be able to afford to enforce this, because this is being enforceable in a court of law.
Mr. Chair, the hope is that the 9% would be an effective incentive, stick, however you want to think of it. It might not be.
No, we agree 100%. I don't think there's a disagreement. The disagreement is for those that didn't get paid, period. We don't disagree. I like where you're going with this. I agree these people playing games with your money and causing small businesses to go down. I agree 1,000%. Let's get them. My problem is those that didn't get paid. And if you're going to invest the time in getting an attorney to press your suit or this suit, you will also know just how many days they've been holding back that money. And I guess my only thing to say is their defense would then be, but I didn't get paid. And they would have to prove that as an affirmative defense to this legal suit in that 9%. That's all. I believe that's all the questions. We're going to go to the opponents. We got the typical Sean Malone and Robert Harrington. Sean, you know, the sky's falling. I get it.
It's been a long time. It's nice to be back. On behalf of the Maryland Minority Contract Association and the Associated Builders and Contractors Association, my name is Sean Malone. 2 years ago, we saw this bill. Same questions, same issues. You get directly to the point. There's two victims here. When an owner doesn't pay the general is not in a position to pay the sub. And the assertion that generals have this money as a rule is just not correct. And the profit margins are sometimes better and sometimes they're not. But the interesting thing is after this bill was introduced 2 years ago, ABC, mechanical contractors, labor, we sat down and we worked through a compromise. That compromise was introduced by Delegate Valderrama, House Bill 1365, that addressed these issues. The delegate did a great job drafting it and addressed these issues. The cure in here was exactly what you said, Mr. Chairman. If a general contractor is not paid, the owner would be hit with a 9% penalty. And that clause could not be waived in contract under that bill. But once the general was paid, they would have to pass that down to the sub. If a general withheld payment when they were paid by the owner, they would then have to, they would be subject to the 9% penalty. It's a logical bill. It makes sense. This bill could be relatively easily amended to fix that. Who's with me today is a general contractor from Baltimore City who works as a general on a sub, Robert E. Harrington. He works under the streets repairing emergency repairs of water mains. And he's going to talk to you about being 8, 9 months behind. He can't float $9 million, as successful as he is.
Hello, my name is Robert Harrington, and I'm the owner of R.E. Harrington Plumbing and Heating, and I'm a general contractor from Baltimore City. So I'm a prime contractor in Baltimore City, 65 employees, and on any given contract, I average 4 contracts a year, and I have 5 or 6 subcontractors per contract. My contract was with Baltimore City in writing is paid when paid. So when I get paid, I have to pay my sub within 7 days. Most municipalities normally run 45 to 60 days when we get paid. Baltimore City recently disbarred a general contract for 3 years, and they put a mechanism in place now. When I get paid, the subcontractor is automatically notified that I got paid, and within 7 days, I have to pay them. My monthly invoice that I send to the city, the subcontractor has to sign off on it for the previous month that they got paid. So some mechanisms in place for payment now for most municipalities. I don't know about the state, but for the city and some counties, they do have things in place now. So if I don't pay a subcontractor, I won't be able to get my payment for the following month. Everything is shut down until I get paid. Most of the contracts all of the contracts that I do is bonded. So if I don't pay a sub or a supplier, they can go after my bond. Yeah, recently I just got a mentorship contract from Baltimore City, and this is one of the main things that I brought up because I start off as a subcontractor, so payment is important. I do agree with some of the stuff that was said here today, but even the mentorship program that I have with the city, and I got it in writing, the best that the city could do in writing is pay within 50 days, not 30 days, 50 days, and that's in writing from a major municipality in Baltimore City. So even though we would all like to get paid in 30 days, we should get paid in 30 days, but even from the municipalities, normally, payment comes in 45 to 55 days from a municipality, not 30. Some days, some months you might get it in 35 days, but normally it's 45-day pay. That's it.
No. He actually addressed the question. My question was, do the municipalities pay on time? No. I knew the answer, but okay.
I guess I have a question. You guys talked about the bill that was actually negotiated. It's kind of similar to what some of us up here were concerned with. Would that 9% that was passed on to, let's say, the owner, would that apply to municipalities?
Yeah, in fact, that bill was amended to include municipalities, because that's in fact, when this bill was first brought up, we addressed that issue, and we said, look, this happens on the local level, it happens on the state level, and it does include local jurisdictions as an owner as well. I mean, the reality is, if you're contracting with Mr. Harrington to build you something, your end of the contract is to pay. His end of the contract is to build. His end of the contract in no way is to finance and provide funding for the rest of the job. And that's what this bill has introduced, inadvertently does. And I know the sponsor's intent is good, and we agree with it. We want to get contractors paid. We don't want to divide the community of generals and subs. We're in the same boat. We're being starved by someone who's not doing what they're contractually obligated to do. It would have to be enforced by an attorney.
And I guess the way you explained the negotiations, that anybody who did bring suit would get their money from somebody. So, because what I was talking about and what I heard was, well, what if you bring suit and come to find out that person didn't get paid and you done paid for a lawyer, now you're kind of stuck. But it sounds like that might be a possible solution, because if they didn't get paid, then whoever didn't pay them is on the hook for the 9%.
And this bill was not heard because, for some reason, Labor asked to have it pulled in the Senate. They were part of the discussions, so the bill was never heard over here. But under that bill, there's actually protection in that it required, if the general were to recoup interest fees, they have to pass it down to the subs as well.
Oh, so if they were to get the 9%?
Has to be passed down. And if they received payment and did not pay, then the general's on the hook, and as well as the sub, and it goes down the line. So it tried to address this issue to get to the real heart of the matter, which is whether it's a private entity, a state or a local entity who's not paying, that they would be subject to the fee.
Okay, we have one question. Elizabeth Hill?
Thank you. Sean?
Yes, ma'am.
It's interesting you're talking about the other bill. This one here, there's a letter from business, the steam fitters, and they bring up 2 points as possible amendments. One is that under the legislation as it is, it's possible for a prime to receive timely payment from an owner, but delay payments to subcontractors simply by paying a penalty. So decide that rather than pay the subcontractor for whatever reason, I'll absorb the penalty, it'll cost me less, and the subcontractor will just have to wait. And they offer an amendment for that. I can imagine, whether we're talking about the subcontractor has a line of credit or not, I think the goal of the sponsor is to make sure that whatever tier is above, they don't get to say it's cheaper for me to pay extra money, and the sub will have to use their line of credit to pay stuff. We could pay them now, but it's rather than me taking out more line of credit. So what is your comment to that? An amendment that says the proposed amendment will require primes to pay subcontractors within 15 calendar days of receiving payment, and failure to do so would have all the legal remedies.
Well, yeah, look, if a general contractor's been paid and is withholding payment, we have no problem with subjecting that general contractor to interest or a penalty. But I think even the testimony of the panel said that's not what happens. 95% of the time, a general contractor gets paid, they pay within 5 days. So they're, by their own admission, and Mr. O'Keefe, I appreciate what he said, they work closely with generals. Generals are not withholding payment when they've been, as a rule, it may happen on occasion. The problem is getting paid by the person who contracted to have something constructed. But yes, I mean, that amendment on its own doesn't fix this bill as drafted, but we don't have an issue with holding bad actors accountable. I would assume Mr. Harrington agrees.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, that concludes this hearing. Gentlemen in the back, we have one more bill, so if you guys could wait around until we're done so we can sit and go in the back and talk as well. Can you do that? We're almost done, and I want to meet you guys in the back. Who? Can you guys do that? Roger, I see that frown on your face. I don't know if that means you don't have enough time.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Outstanding. Yeah, if we can, the interested parties on this bill, not you, but the proponents of this bill, I'd like to meet after this last hearing.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, you don't need Mr. Harrington and I.
I don't.
That's
Just the
surprising, but-
proponents.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, last bill of the day, guys. Delegate Queen. And please bring up your panel. You have your panel.
Just me. I move a favorable. I you so bad. Okay. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and my colleagues on Economic Matters Bill. This should be something that's very simple. We've done this before in the state, and so we're just looking at another profession to do this with. So HB 427 establishes an emeritus status for licensed and in good standing certified public accountants in Maryland. This status would be granted to individuals who are at least 60 years of age, are retired as CPAs, and have practiced at least 40 years in the field and at least 20 years in the state of Maryland. And so this emeritus status is granted for other professions, but what you're doing when you do this is leveraging these individuals' experience and extensive expertise, and they tend to do volunteer work with organizations that might need some accounting knowledge and support. They often teach accounting classes. They join advisory boards to provide consulting services to family and neighbors. As long as the person is not a client, they can offer tax preparation assistance. And so this would be they would be exempt from the regular licensing fees and educational requirements that the CPAs must undergo in Maryland. That's every 2 years. They have to complete 80 hours of continuing education and 4 hours of ethics training and pay a renewal fee of $56. So again, we've done this in Maryland for other professions such as physicians, architects, faculty members at the University of Maryland. And so this is a restricted license that just honors and recognizes the expertise that these individuals who are now retired can provide to the community. So I seek a favorable recommendation on this bill. Any questions?
Delegate Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the bill. Just a question, if they wish to come off of emeritus status, they just have to complete the
They have to go back
continuing education requirements at
and
that
come
time?
back to that cycle again,
Okay.
correct?
All right, thank you.
Yeah, they can come off.
Seeing no other questions, I believe that concludes this bill hearing and concludes the hearings for the day. Colleagues, thank you very much. I do not believe we have anything going on tonight, so enjoy your time off. Thank you.